climate targets from the Paris Agreement have resulting in rising commitments towards net zero economies, where more than 100 countries have pledged or are considering carbon neutral ambitions. These commitments are essential as the United Nations has stated that achieving global net zero emission by the year 2050 is critical to avoid the worst effect of climate change. So instead of the worst is yet to come, let's try and contain it. Some of our peers already experienced this course. For example, and this quoting Standard & Poor's Global ESG Trends for the year 2022, it says in 2021 alone, the United States experienced 20 storms, where each incurred losses exceeding 1 billion US dollars. 20 times 1 billion, if you can imagine that. And also, quoting the European Commission, they say, and the European Commission predicts that if no policy measures are adopted, the cost of climate change in Europe could reach almost 4% of GDP by the end of the century. 4%. So, with these issues and national commitments in place, the public sector has set an agenda that spreads across different players, across different key players and industries. Of course, there is an increasing call for regulation, financing opportunities, accountability, right? Clean energy infrastructure, what we were hearing from the other panel, and innovation to help enable the conditions required to meet our climate targets, where everyone has a role to play. Today, we've brought together some of the key industry individuals who are involved in the climate agenda, so we can further understand what's the role they play in the climate change commitment within the wider ecosystem. So I'll briefly go through their bio. By the way, my name is Maged Izzeddin. I'm PwC Egypt Senior Partner. I'll start with Vegas Agrawal to my left. So they all have impressive CVs. Regional Head of Public Affairs, Europe, Eurasia, the Middle East, and Americas, ACCA Global Accounting. So I'm a CPA if it's okay. Okay. So Vegas Agrawal is the Regional Head of Public Affairs of Europe, Eurasia, Middle East, and Americas at ACCA. He has 15 years of experience in advising governments on socioeconomic issues such as technology adoption, future talent development, corporate governance, sustainability, and financial inclusion. And before joining the ACCA, Vika spent over a decade working for the UK government across financial service industry strategy, international trade, and foreign policy, and left the government after a period of time as a diplomat based in the Middle East. Warm welcome, Vikas. And we move to my friend Faisal Isa, General Manager for Likeila Egypt, Renewable Energy Delivery. A seasoned renewable energy professional with true passion for the field, supported by 24 years of experience within the energy and electric power business in development, project management, strategy, business development, and general management in Africa, the Middle East, and Europe. Warm welcome, Faisal. Dr. Botros Klink is the CEO, Middle East and Bahrain Standard Charter Bank, shall I say, the long-awaited bank in Egypt. Botros works as the CEO, Middle East, excluding UAE, a Standard Charter, which is a banking company with an estimated 81.8 thousand employees and founded in 1969. Last but not least, Dr. Sophie Vaz, Program Director, the Knowledge Hub Academia. So Dr. Sofia is currently the program director of the degree on environmental engineering at Nova Cairo, which is a Portuguese university, the best in Portuguese, right? Um, so Nova Cairo, in partnership with the Knowledge Hub University, situated in the new capital. Sophia has 30 years of experience working in several fields before moving several private and public organizations, both national and international, in the environmental field. Before moving to Egypt, Sophia has published extensively, namely books, scientific papers, chapters in books, and popular science types of books on several themes related to environment, ethics, and sustainability. Warm welcome. Let's get to the questions. I'll start with you, Vegas. Um, what are the critical regulation and instruments that help embed climate change risk consideration into business practice? I think you need to turn it on.
Yeah, thank you very much, Megan. So for us, look, in the same way that we're here communicating in English, we need a common business language. And for us, that's international financial reporting. If we take Egypt as an example, one of the biggest and most effective changes that Egypt could make would be to adopt international standards. We do a lot of work with the International Financial Reporting Foundation, and through their own words, they recognize that if we're going to fully implement international sustainability standards, we need to start with building those foundations. For us at ACCA, this has been part of our existence for several decades. We've built sustainability into our qualifications and into our procedures because we recognize that this is not something that you can just switch on overnight. There's a huge skills gap in this, in understanding the challenges that are coming and how to mobilize capital, particularly green finance. And so for us as an education and professional accountancy body, we have a big duty to work with governments, educators, businesses to make sure that we're lifting standards together, and that if we're thinking in particular about foreign investment into governments, into countries, that when an investor comes to a country, they understand what's going on. Now, with regards to risk assessments, one of the biggest challenges is short-term thinking, of course. Now, accountants are predominantly there to create, protect, and communicate value. You can't do that if you're not integrating long-term risk into your business planning. If you're thinking about your profits in short term, what's better for your clients as an accounting firm? Do you want your client to be there really profitable next year, or do you want them to still to exist in 5 years' time? And so when we think about, particularly within the corporate reporting environment, this is about managing risk in a much better way. You heard earlier on with insurance, it's not about avoiding risk, it's about understanding it and managing it. It's about making sure that your businesses, that your assets are valued in the right and proper way to protect yourself against catastrophes, to make sure that if you do have a storm in the US, that your business and your land, you can be fully compensated for it. This isn't something limited to big companies. This is about SMEs, ensuring that where you have economies made up of 90% SMEs, that they are protected, that they're getting the best strategic advice they can have to support their long-term growth and productivity.
Very good, thank you. And I'm an accountant like you, so I'm biased. I'll give you an interesting question, Faisal. What are the current conditions that are creating bottlenecks for the widespread adoption of renewable energy sources?
Thank you very much, Magid. So first of all, let me just briefly start with what we do. So then when we pick up on your question, which is not in the script, by the way, but I'll answer. We are working in renewables energy. So we're mandated to work across Africa only. And we develop wind farms. We develop them, we invest in them, we operate, so we live like any local company. We have two pillars for growth, two countries that we are building and operating a lot of wind farms, South Africa and Egypt. Egypt also makes the one pillar for growth, but we have other projects across Africa. The wind farm that we own here in Egypt is one of the biggest investment wind farms in the country. So 250 megawatt on Ras Gharib in the Gulf of Suez area. So back to your question, it's of course obviously very good to have targets and to have regulations and laws which is supporting such targets. If it was not for the original target that we had 20% of renewables by 2022, there will be no West Bakr project today. If there is no regulations and laws which is supporting it, like the ones issued back in 2014 and 15 in Egypt, there will be no project to be implemented today. So is this enough? No, I think we need more. What we are seeing is that we don't see that there will be a lot of government offtake in the future. There is marriage between renewable energy and new industries like green hydrogen, green desalination, as His Excellency Walid Gamal have just said. And that needs a lot of restructuring and having new laws and new regulations helping us to reach our new targets 2035. Now we're talking about 42%, maybe a little bit earlier. So that's one thing. The other thing is that it's not a matter of pushing a button. So it's not a matter of having gigawatts, having finance available, and that's it. It works. No. There is things like technology transfer, few things to do with infrastructure and the availability of the network. So this morning and in previous sessions, we heard about the Green Corridor in Egypt, and this is to accept all these gigawatts of renewables and green hydrogen that has been signed. We need to have probably to run a parallel network to the current network that we have today. So that's one example. And infrastructure, we're not talking only about transmission or electric transmission networks. We're talking about ports, we're talking about roads, we're talking about capabilities to do installations, local industries, and so on. One final point that I'll pick up on, and then I'll leave a chance for my colleagues to also comment on that, about technology transfer and local industries. There is big emphasis on huge projects to be implemented in the coming period. And if we're talking about 10 gigawatts, 20 gigawatts, I'm hearing now they're reaching 26, those need local integration and they need local manufacturing. So there should be some kind of a program that will encourage increasing the local content, attracting manufacturing here. We heard about the problem of electrolyzers, let alone turbines, PV panels, and all the supporting industries helping the quick growth. Thanks.
Absolutely agree with what said. I'll jump to Dr. Sophia. What are the current emerging solutions that could help increase adoption and have a meaningful impact on climate targets?
Um, uh, of course, when you ask on emerging solutions, most of you most probably think immediately on knowledge, on research, on innovation, on science, on technology, on new concepts, on critical analysis. So, I mean, it's almost the definition of a university. So I'm really happy that you invited universities to this conversation because they really have a role as well in all this process. And so thank you for having invited me. I wanted to put the idea that universities have a big role in this conversation. But thank you for inviting me. I'm from the Nova University of Lisbon in Cairo. The Knowledge Hub campus, which is a project from LCD Education, has a campus in the new capital with now only 2 universities only, University of Coventry and now also Nova University of Lisbon. And we're just starting with environmental engineering. Now, when we are thinking about emerging solutions, sometimes I think we are too obsessed with new things all the time. And I think we should not reduce the solutions to the emerging ones, because we have been around for the past decades inventing solutions. And if we always keep on inventing new ones and new concepts, and a lot is lost on the way just because we want something new. So I think we are surrounded by old, new, and future ideas and actions and concepts. Within both the research area, within the policy arena, within the economic arena, within the social arena. and so we should be aware of it. Plus, there are thousands of websites and organizations and countries that are thinking about this. So it's really difficult to pinpoint what are the emerging solutions and what to do. So, so solutions, there are a lot. The problem is implementing them and, you know, get them adopted, which is actually more the point of your question. And I mean, the obvious things is, you know, capacity building, awareness, legal instruments, economic instruments, communication, which is one of my, as you said, I like to write popular science type of books because it's really important to communicate science, and this helps a lot. And I have a special care for this idea that social sciences have a lot to give to the adoption of new and emerging solutions. There are several of these schemes of how to catalyze change. There are these 4 E's one that I really like, which actually is something from more than 15 years ago from the UK, from the energy department. It's this idea of enabling, removing barriers, giving information, providing facilities, also engaging, community action, co-production, personal contacts, enthusiasts. So a lot of these things that we usually don't think so much. And then, of course, you know, the legal and there is a fly around here. The legal and the economic one, economic instruments and tools that are very important, taxes and laws and so on. And I would finalize with which what I love more is this idea that climate change is essentially an ethical problem as well, an ethical question. And so I think we need a lot ethics to help us define the north and the south and the west and the east of our moral compass to know where we are heading. And I will leave it at this stage.
Thank you very much. Botrus, the session title is Green Finance, and you're the banker here, right? What are the current forms of green financing from financial institutions and government entities as well that could help incentivize climate change solutions for business and households alike?
No, thanks, Magid, and good afternoon to everyone. Absolutely delighted to be here. And I'd like to thank the Egyptian British Chamber of Commerce and the British Egyptian Business Association for the partnership. I'd like to just give you a 1-minute background of the bank. So Standard Chartered Bank is a British organization established around 160 plus years ago to focus on the emerging markets. So our focus is Asia, the Middle East, and Africa. And our presence in around 60 countries, mostly those emerging markets, but also in some of the countries of the West, is really to connect the emerging markets to some of the developed world as well. So we play an important part in this channeling of funds from the people who have the money to the people who need the money. That is basically the job of a bank. Now, it's very important to put a little bit of context to this entire sustainability drive. It is probably one of the biggest challenges we will face, our generation and the generations to come. As we look at emerging markets, the amount of money required to basically get us to net zero in emerging markets is close to $100 trillion. This is not a small amount. This is not a small amount. It's a massive amount. And our job as bankers is to try to unlock and mobilize the funds in order to basically get us to where we need to get to achieve this objective. Now, Um, a lot of work has happened in this space over the last few years. I think events such as COPs and the multitude of conferences around sustainability have helped raise awareness in that area. We've had a lot of pledges from countries, in different institutions, etc., definitely ramping up in the last few years, but not enough. We've had our own pledges as well as Standard Chartered in terms of what we will do to get ourselves to net zero in terms of our operations, but also in terms of our portfolios. In terms of the products, which is the question that Magid asked a few minutes ago, the products have been evolving quite rapidly. Last year, we launched around 16 new products in the space of sustainability, green, etc. They span a multitude of different areas. It can be the blended finances, where we work together with multinational organizations, governments, sovereign wealth funds, as well as the private sector to make financing available. But also the biggest and deepest market is the capital markets. And we've seen the green bond market evolve quite considerably over the last few years. We've seen innovation in that area expand quite rapidly. We just saw Saudi launch a 100-year green bond, the first 100-year, the first one launched by a sovereign wealth fund in that direction. I'd like to commend Egypt for launching the first green bond by a sovereign a couple of years ago. So this is where the funds are deep. Now the question is, how are we going to get the funds from the people who have it, the investors, into the people who need it, and more importantly, the emerging markets, because sustainable, what is happening in terms of climate change, the impact on emerging markets is quite significant, and it's 4 or 5 times the impact on some of the developing world. And I'm sure we'll get further into that during our conversation.
Thank you very much for that. Because of time, I'll try to compress a couple of questions together. Back to you, Vegas, if I may. How do these regulations that we mentioned and instrument impact business and the respective consumers, right? And perhaps as a follow-up questions, also, what are the items that need to be considered in the design phase of these instruments to ensure they are effective and have tangible impact?
Yeah, look, it's a really good question. So there are 2 elements to it. One is, but they are sort of linked. In terms of financing, there's a really big challenge here. We've heard from businesses that they are coming up against lending challenges more and more so, in that their banks are actually asking them to demonstrate that they are sustainable, that they are thinking about their long-term plans, and that the investment or the loan that they may get from their bank is actually going to be repaid because the business will still be around. And that's a really, really big issue, is that if you cannot access that capital because your bank doesn't think that you're investable, then what are you going to do? You have to change. And of course, we know that financing for smaller businesses is much more expensive. So there's a huge issue here about getting the right kind of finance to the right organizations. Thinking about larger companies, with bonds and the like, there is a huge amount of criteria to these, that you are sustainable, that you can demonstrate it through your reports and everything else. But when you think about how that reflects on value chains and the companies that they work with, there are going to be some really big changes made. Now, a company may start writing out SMEs if they aren't part of that sustainable journey. This is a really, really big issue, particularly for emerging economies where you may have, 50 to 90% of your economy made up of SMEs. And then we're thinking about financing. There's a challenge there for SMEs in particular. What we would like to see is really how large companies can actually help invest in those smaller companies to make their journeys more sustainable. I'll give you an example from regulation. Now, within the EU, the CSRD is coming in great force. It's here soon. It's going to start off with public entities, with public interest entities, with listed companies. But a few years later, it's going to hit all SMEs across Europe. And I can tell you now that those SMEs are terrified. I mean, we work with accountancy bodies and SME industries across all of Europe and global. We're across 170 odd countries. And every one of them is worried about what this means for them. And so we're looking to encourage, through our members around the world, to work with businesses, to invest in smaller companies, to invest in that value chain, bring them along with you. So that's a real tangible impact that these new regulations are actually having on businesses. If we think again, we've talked a lot about how you can localize work in Egypt, in other countries. The same goes for Egypt. It's not but it's about how do we help Egyptian businesses adopt sustainable standards, improve that reporting, that communication of their sustainable value. In terms of the design instruments and such, we need to make sure, look, we've talked a lot about just transition, and that's a really important point here, is that it's not fair to ask everyone to all of a sudden be sustainable overnight. We've got to make sure that we don't allow regulations to, in effect, phase out emerging economies because they're not at the same place that others are. That's something that we do need to manage. What we also need to see is a collective effort from businesses and governments to help bring together sort of the corporate reporting infrastructure. So that is making sure that we have a much more integrated approach to risk management, to, as I said, corporate reporting, to sustainability standards. It's great that we've got universities represented here because the education piece is hugely important. And we want to make sure that businesses start thinking in a new way, assisted by their accountants, their auditors, because that's what we're here to do, such that they can embrace new changes in natural capital management. They can think about their water use. They can think about their footprint.
Very well said. I'll give you an easy question, Faisal. What are the current incentives and solutions that are being implemented that could help mitigate or eliminate these bottlenecks? So that's the first one. And if you can also talk about how are these situations different across regions?
Okay, so that's not a very easy question. Of course, if I may just comment on few things quickly, a couple of points. First of all, the importance of education, ENS specifically. I'll just give one example on a challenge. I don't say it's a bottleneck, but it's one of the challenges we met building Westbuck 250 megawatt in Ras Gharib was how can we cater for environment and the social community while we're building this project. So first of all, we had to train a lot of the locals on this job during construction and operations, and of course, helping them to find opportunities to work not only with us, but with other wind farms in the area as well. The other thing is the environmental impact. Yes, those projects are clean energy production projects by default, but let's not forget that sustainability means the famous triangle. It's business, social, and environmental as well. So when it comes to environmental, we were facing the biggest migrating birds corridor in the world. 80 to 90% of the migrating birds twice a year pass through the wind farm. And we had to implement a very complicated program called ATMP, Automatic Shutdown or Automatic Turbines Management Plan, where we actually simply stop turbines when we see birds, and we had to be very selective to avoid losing a lot of energy. So those are just challenges that are not directly related to your industry, but you face and you have to cater for them as well. So taking off from this and what kind of incentives could be provided. I'll just give one example that I was very happy to hear about. The Golden License, as has been announced maybe a couple of weeks ago. We were together in the same forum as well. So when I read about the Golden License that has been offered by the government, and the president has extended its validity for the next 3 months, I think. It's actually covering green hydrogen and green desalination projects as well. This says something about the bottlenecks that we see in administrative works. So you can imagine the amount of how many licenses you have to get, how many permits, and of course each and every one has its own requirements. So that is a typical incentive that could be very interesting. The other thing, of course, is what Boutros actually tapped on, is availability of financing. And I always say equal opportunities for financing. There is huge projects. A lot of those projects are coming up in our area. So we want to make sure that all countries, specifically in our part of the world, has also equal opportunities for financing and for access to finance. The other question was about the region. Of course, each and every country, if I take the African continent, as we are talking about an African COP, each and every country has its own issues, and to different degrees, of course. So we talked about some of the issues that we have in Egypt. Some other issues, I'll just give a small example. In South Africa, for example, the cycle of the tendering itself for projects is very long, and it takes a long time for the whole cycle to come up, and then you know whether you have a project or not. Despite the fact that they have a longer term plan, which is clearer for investors like ours, but they have their own problem in terms of running the show and running the plan. On the contrary, in Egypt, you would find a lot of administrative issues. We need an upgrade on our legislation, as I mentioned, but in South Africa, it's the other way around. So they actually have very clear legislations on what needs to be done. You would find more of a local industries in South Africa, less in Egypt. So every country has its own issues, but they're more or less, they go around the main 6-7 points that we discussed in different degrees. Thanks.
You're welcome. This session is videotaped, Faisal, so everything you say can and will be taken against you.
And I'll change my mind towards the end.
I'll move to Boutros. Are there any areas of opportunities or improvements within this financing solutions?
No, thanks, Magid. I mean, let me touch upon a couple of things earlier, and then I'll get to this. As an international organization, when we talk about our supply chain, now we are pushing very hard that whoever provides us with any services or materials, they have a sustainability agenda as well. So we're pushing it down the supply chain, and we're asking our clients to do the same. This is how we can get the snowballing effect running throughout the world. In terms of Africa, just to comment on that, the current challenges are quite massive. I mean, augmented by higher interest rates, high inflation, devaluation currencies, higher commodity prices and the like. So they have fiscal challenges, and you have to impose on those some of the initiatives that we're pushing towards a greener planet. So a lot of hard work needs to go there, a lot of support as well needs to go to ensure that this just transition is also an equal transition across the world. Now, back to improvements. Yes, absolutely. In terms of the solutions, we are working on improvements on a day-to-day basis. Every project we look at, every client we have a conversation with, it's a lot of learning for us, but also it's a lot of work in terms of coming up with innovations to try to deliver the solutions that are workable, that are viable, that are bankable. Because in order to pull the money from the investors, the projects have to be bankable. Now, where we find it easier, I think this is in terms of what we need to do to attract investment money. Obviously, you need to have a clear strategy. whether it's at a country level, whether it's at a company level towards net zero, you need to have the clear regulations. You need to have taxonomy. That means the definitions of what we're talking about have to be consistent, and where investors are not struggling to understand every single country, project, etc. A lot of the specifics. They need some common standards. They need proper statements. They need targets. They need to ensure that whoever is reviewing those targets, assessing what is happening within those projects, are companies with a strong reputation that they can trust. They also need to ensure that we are delivering on those targets and delivering the returns that are required, that are commensurate with the risks that are being taken. Obviously, where interest rates are at this point in time, it's a lot more difficult and challenging than when interest rates were at zero, because it is a lot easier to generate returns for a lot less risk. So a lot of work needs to happen on that front, but we are definitely looking at that ourselves, but also a lot of other financial institutions. Everybody is aware, everybody's taking this extremely seriously, and we realize that no action is not a solution. So I think that...
Thank you.
Thank you.
I don't think we had zero interest rate in Egypt. We just increased the interest rate by 200 basis points. And, Dr. Sophia, what is the role of academia and research institutions in the task of enabling conditions to achieve climate targets? And if I can also add to it, what are the current studies exploring in the realms of climate engineering innovation?
Thank you for the questions. Universities, of course, they have the responsibility to serve the global community. In the New Atlantis, Francis Bacon, more than 500 years ago, already portrayed the vision of a future based on human discovery and knowledge, basically meaning that the role of science is to help humanity. So universities have this responsibility to help understand what are the challenges that humanity is facing. And of course, climate change is one of the biggest and most pressing challenges. So it makes completely sense that universities are focusing on it. And I would divide this role of academia perhaps in 3 points. And the first one, then again, is a bit philosophical. I'm sorry about this. In such a financial world, to talk a bit about philosophy. But it's actually, when I was invited to come here, I thought I was going to give a presentation with PowerPoint, and I even gave it a title, which was University as a Condition of Possibility for a Sustainable Future. And this condition of possibility is a Kantian principle to exclude the an exclusive causal relationship, but just to give the conditions for something to happen. And I think that's the role of universities, is to give the conditions. It's not because there are universities that we will have a sustainable future, but the universities give the conditions for the possibility of the existence of a sustainable future. So the second thing is this idea of universities as sustainability labs, so to speak. Because we do not have only the responsibility to create research, innovation, and knowledge, but we also have the responsibilities for ourselves being an example of turning ourselves into, sustainable institutions as well, and also have this commitment towards society, mainly through the dissemination of the results. So university can act as sustainability labs, at least in building and creating knowledge and ideally wisdom, of course, being sustainable, because universities are big consumers of resources, water, energy, food, technology, paper, etc., and producers of waste as well. And so decarbonizing and other climate actions are really important for universities. And as you probably know, universities love rankings. Who is the best in this, who is the best in that. And there is already a ranking for universities and climate action. So this means really that we are really already having universities accountable of, if you are teaching sustainability, please do it as well. And there is a big movement towards that. And then, of course, is this idea of disseminating and creating awareness to everybody, not only students, but all academia, non-academia, and everybody. I mean, you all have been probably at one university at a certain point in your life. So imagine if when you were at university, you had learned much more about sustainability, where would you be now? Would you be where you are, or would you be somewhere else? I don't know. Anyway, I recently read an expression, really nice expression in a paper, and it was like this: universities with their low carbon operational practices reduce their institutional carbon footprint, which is like normal, yeah? But in their curricular and pedagogic approaches, they expand a societal carbon brain print. And this is really nice, is this idea of carbon being in our brains. And so we are ready for that. And I really like this idea of universities imprinting this carbon brain print, which takes me to my last point, which is citizens of the future. And this is what university does. Universities are incubators of future decision makers, of future trendsetters, of future climate leaders, of future leaders. And so we have the responsibility and the opportunity to induce these behavioral and cultural changes to all students. And some universities, of course, offer sustainability courses. And if I may allow now to make a bit of publicity, we are offering environmental engineering. So it's a specific course on environment and on sustainability. But most universities either already are including sustainability principles in all other courses. And for example, Coventry, which is also there in the Knowledge Hub, doesn't have any environmental engineering, but has sustainability in all its other courses. So I think climate change education, right. You want me to finish? Yes, I will. Can be formal, informal, or non-formal, and this is really important. Thank you.
Okay, very good. I know, Boutros, you have another commitment at 12:30, so can I quickly ask you one question? What are the systems put in place that ensures the finance provided by green loans and bonds are having the expected impact and are measured into climate targets?
No, thank you, Magid. And to Dr. Sophia, I actually studied civil and environmental engineering, but there was no talk about sustainability at that point in time. So I'm glad we're bringing it into the program. In terms of the systems, so what are we looking at? We're looking at one, reducing the direct and the financed emissions within the bank's portfolios. So we have our operations. I mentioned a little bit our supply chain, but the bigger part is the loans that the bank has already made. And some loans have gone to oil and gas, cement, aviation, and so on. So part of that is how do we transition that to net zero. The second bit is in terms of what are we doing in terms of the green projects and the sustainability solution, which is what I touched upon a little bit earlier today. And then how are we gonna manage the financial and non-financial risks associated with all this transition? And this is actually a massive undertaking as we try to understand the risks, how we're going to manage those risks, and across different risk parameters in terms of reputation, in terms of doing the right thing, but also in terms of credit, in terms of market risks, and so on. We at Standard Chartered are looking at all of these. We have had conversations with many of our clients trying to understand what risks they face. I think the interesting bit from the investor side of things, a lot of them are looking to put sustainable products in their portfolios. And if we look, actually 42% of the big money managers that we spoke with want to increase their portfolios of sustainable products to around 15%, which is a massive move, knowing the amount of money that is under management at this point in time. So there's a lot of work, a lot of money that is available if the right framework is in place. So what are we doing from a framework perspective? We have frameworks for green and sustainable products. We have frameworks for the transition finance that we're looking at quite aggressively and engaging with a lot of our counterparts in order to help them transition. We think the biggest impact will be on transitioning existing big clients with large portfolios of projects, etc., into a greener business. Because innovation is fantastic. It is definitely picking up. We are investing quite a bit on our end in terms of seeing it develop, but it will take a bit of time for it to get us to where we need to get to. If the amount of, if we need to accelerate this entire transition while ensuring safety of energy, while ensuring affordability of energy. We're seeing what is happening currently in Europe. It's a function of, it's a challenge with the safety and the supply of energy. And that is something that the West has not seen before, but this is what we see day in, day out in emerging markets like Africa. 50% of the people in Africa don't have consistent power. So when we're having the conversations there, it's a completely different conversation. So a long answer to your question, but I mean, the work is massive. The systems, the infrastructure, it touches banks across the board, across the spectrum of risks. Previously, we looked at climate risk as a specific risk. Now we look at climate risk as a risk that overarches all risks, because everything has a climate sustainable risk component. So a lot of work happening on that front, a lot of thought leadership that is taking place. But the course is set. There's one way to go, and we need to accelerate it to the extent we can. I apologize. I may have to hop because I am expected at another panel elsewhere. Would love to connect with whoever is interested to carry on this conversation forward. Magid and my fellow panelists, thank you very, very much.
Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you, sir.
And I was told we're running out of time, so maybe quickly closing remarks from each of the panelists. Go ahead. Thank you. Faisal, since you're holding the mic.
I can start, no problem.
Yeah.
Just on a closing remark, of course, we're seeing a huge opportunity for Egypt, as also has been highlighted in the previous panels and all the previous discussions in the previous days, with green hydrogen, with green desalination. So the marriage of new technologies with renewables will create a huge opportunity for us, for Egypt and for Africa. I've seen other countries having very similar plans. The whole idea here is that this cannot be transformed from PowerPoint to megawatts, as we always say, except with having a lot of collaboration and ingredients, such as financing, technology transfer, getting over all the administrative issues that we have. I know that I'm being taped, And we also should have an update for our regulations and laws to make sure that we can really move quick and fast with such huge plan. I remember very well a couple of years ago, a 250 megawatt in West Bakr, when we were building the project, was a huge challenge for us. Now we're talking about gigawatts. I mean, I sit with everyone and everybody talks about 10 gigawatts, 20 gigawatts. I mean, a quarter of a giga, 250 megawatt, is the biggest project in the country today, and it faced huge challenges. We can imagine then what a 26 gigawatts or a 38 gigawatts would do. Yeah.
Yeah, look, thank you very much. So I was going to answer, who are the main stakeholders? And I think Boutros explained really nicely how financiers and investors are changing their behaviors, both from where they place their money, which is really important, but also who their clients are and how they're viewing the risk of their clients. That's a really big issue. But you don't understand that without upskilling. And so ACCA, we're a professional accountancy body. We've got over 750,000 members and students around the world. We have a duty to upskill them, which is why today we're launching a brand new climate finance qualification in order to help our members and our students. So Magad, I'm expecting PwC Egypt to sign up to that straight away. Look, we in all of the addition to the private sector, to educators making these moves, we need strong political leadership. And we've seen that a lot from Egypt. I mean, it's been absolutely fantastic being here this week so far. But there are more steps we can take. We're looking to the Ministry of Finance, to the central bank, to make some of these big changes to sustainability standards, to adopt international financial reporting standards as the baseline, and then towards ISSB standards. We've seen over 2/3 of G20 countries make this step, and more of the G77 are moving in this direction. So we'd hope to see that taking place. And of course, we here at ACCA are on hand to work with governments and businesses in sort of moving on this journey. And I think we have to do it together to ensure that we have equitable transition, that we support businesses of all sizes, and actually we try and address some of these really pressing climate targets.
Absolutely, and you have our full support. Doctor?
I would like to finish with this idea that we have to work all together. Universities and banks and universities and governments, universities and everybody has to work together. And I think the SDGs, for example, they are a good example of this idea that we cannot work with atomistic solutions anymore in single areas. This will not work. So we need to be interdisciplinary, interdependent, global, think together and think on themes together as well. And for climate change, of course, it's really important to look at the ocean and the climate change at the same time, biodiversity, as you were mentioning, and climate change at the same time, poverty and climate change at the same time. This is really, really important. Then I also have this idea that technology is really important, and also being an environmental engineer, there are a lot of things that are happening and they are really exciting, but technology is not I don't believe in the technological fix. There is technology contributes a lot, but there is much more than technology to solve the problems. Because I think technology, we are very good at technology. This is what we are best. But then the next step is the most important. And I will just finish with this again with Kant, because I think we are in an enlightenment era now. When once someone asked Kant how he would define the Enlightenment, he began his answer with this Latin poet Horace, which was sapere aude, which means dare to know. And he said that was defining the Enlightenment at that time. Is this that we have a sort of self-imposed immaturity in our minds, and we don't want to really think forward. So immaturity he defines as inability to use our own understanding without the guidance from someone else. And so I think this is, deeply, this is what we have to do, to really think what we want and where we are heading, and then go for it. Thank you.
Very good. Ian, do you have time for one or two questions, or should we close? 5 minutes? Okay, let's have a couple of questions. And please raise your hand and say who you are and who you want to address the question to. I can answer question.
Thank you very much. My name is Ahmed Khattab from Bash Global based in London. Actually, I have a couple of questions, but I will break these questions into two questions. One question to Mr. Vikas. In the beginning, you have said that in order to support the climate change protection scheme, we need to speak one language. And you refer to specific standards. My question is, what are standards you are referring, and who is reviewing these standards and publishing those standards? This is my first question. My second question to Mr. Potros, but he left, so I will keep it only one. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a really good. Sorry, it's a really good question. So over the past couple of years, we've seen a lot of consolidation of all of the various sustainability bodies. It's like an alphabet soup: GRI, CDP, IFRS, IWSP. We were part of the Integrated Reported Foundation when it started, and that set the framework for what good corporate reporting should look like, bringing together financial and non-financial in a single way. So it's not an add-on. And over the past 2 years, the Value Reporting Foundation then joined a couple of others to create the International Sustainability Standards Board. And then that, in turn, came under the leadership of the International Financial Reporting Standards Foundation. So you can see how all of this is driven towards one single body. And IFRS Foundation are actually here this week, speaking later on today, and they'll be making their own announcement. But they are going to be, hopefully, the overarching global body. And they've just actually announced another integration as well. The overarching global body for corporate reporting as a whole, financial and non-financial, in an integrated way. And we're fortunate to be a strategic partner to IFRS Foundation, and will be leading some of the implementation of that. But they themselves, and they're trying to do it from a global perspective. So it's making sure that all countries can transition fairly and equally. They really are quite truly representative. So yeah.
Any more questions? No? Thank you very much.
Well, I think as we finish each panel, there's always something. I mean, you learn something in everything you do. I think I'd want to say thank you to all of you on this panel, because you've raised something completely different from what we were talking about earlier today. So Maged, thank you for the thought you put into the questions to make sure that we got this out of the panel. Thank you to the panel. And I think you've actually raised for us, actually, you've got us thinking about things that we may not have thought of. We may not be solving all the problems, but at least you've got us thinking harder about it. So if I may, thank you all for being here. And I'm sure you want me to say thanks again to the panel. Thank you.